All right, good afternoon. Happy Friday. Happy to see you all. I see the system even let Maria in, so we know things are working. And I'm sorry to start so early. I also just want to let you know that next week I will be away from the computer and Fahan will be here answering your question. I think Ari will also do it for one day. Okay, so just remember you have to mute all your microphones and then we'll call on you through the chat or any other way. This morning, as you may have seen, we issued the following statement on the fate of seafarers, which I want to read into the record. The Secretary General is concerned about the growing humanitarian and safety crisis facing seafarers around the world. As a result of COVID-related travel restrictions, hundreds of thousands of the world's 2 million seafarers have been stranded at sea for months, unable to get off ships. The maximum sea time stipulated in international conventions is being ignored, with some seafarers marooned at sea for 15 months. Shipping transports more than 80% of the world's trade, including vital medical supplies, food, and other basic goods that are critical for the pandemic response and recovery. This ongoing crisis will have a direct consequence on the shipping industry. The world could not function without the efforts of seafarers, yet their contributions go largely unheralded. They deserve far greater support at any time, but especially now. The Secretary General calls on all countries to formally designate seafarers and other marine personnel as, quote, key workers to ensure crew changeovers can safely take place. The United Nations agencies, including the International Labour Organization and the International Maritime Organization, have worked with the International Chamber of Shipping and International Transport Workers Federation to develop protocols for crew changeovers, taking into account, of course, the full public health concerns. The Secretary General calls on all governments to urgently implement these protocols, allowing stranded seafarers to repatriate and others to join. Back here at the Security Council this morning, the Secretary General's Special Representative for Africa, François Loncenifal, said the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the lives of citizens as well as functioning of states and regional institutions in Africa. In Central Africa, I must add. The resulting economic crisis disproportionately affects the sub-region of Central Africa, where many countries are oil producers. As governments are forced to choose between the urgent public health priorities and other lacking the resources needed for the smooth functioning of national institutions and financing of crucial reforms. Mr. Loncenifal highlighted the efforts of regional governments and organizations to counter the virus, but he added the persistence of armed conflict in some parts of Central Africa undermines our efforts to respond to challenges posed by the pandemic. The Special Representative condemned deliberate attacks on civilians and the destruction of private property and public infrastructure, including hospitals. His full remarks are online and have been shared with you. I also wanted to share an update from our UN peacekeepers in Mali who are working with a network of local radio stations in Gao and Mendaka to provide information about the virus. Some of the radio stations also broadcast a show called Objectif Santé, which is produced by Mikado FM, the UN mission's radio station. This in collaboration with the World Health Organization and the Malian health personnel to help raise awareness about the virus. The mission is also supporting civil rights groups in Gao, which are undertaking awareness-raising campaigns targeting youth. This includes a program that involves the publication of messages from local influential personalities and leaders on social networks and radio. Meanwhile, the African Union United Nations Joint Peacekeeping Operation in Darfur has urged communities in the state of South Darfur to exercise restraint and maintain calm following an incident in a camp for internally displaced people, in which 2 people were killed and another was injured. The mission responded immediately, deploying 2 foreign police units and a military unit in and around the camp to avert any further violence or potential reprisals. The mission is working closely with the government of Sudan's forces to diffuse tensions and restore calm. The head of the mission, Jeremiah Mamabolo, called on all communities involved to exercise self-restraint and seek justice through appropriate judicial processes and refrain from meeting violence with violence. He said the mission will continue to collaborate with the IDP leaders, native administration, and government authorities on protecting civilians and engaging with them regarding this matter. Turning to Libya, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that nearly 24,000 people have fled their homes in the last week following increased insecurity in southern Tripoli, Tarhuna, and Sirte. Most people have fled to eastern Libya. Most of the newly displaced are sheltering with relatives, friends, and other host families. We once again urge all parties to the conflict to respect the rule of law, for civilians to be protected, and for all efforts to be made to de-escalate tensions. Yesterday, the UN mission in Libya expressed horror at the reports of at least 8 mass graves in the past days, the majority of them in Tarhuna. International law requires that the authorities conduct prompt, effective, and transparent investigations into alleged cases of unlawful deaths, the mission said. And following up on the humanitarian consequences of violence in Sahel, the UN Refugee Agency has launched an appeal for $186 million to provide life-saving protection and assistance to refugees, internally displaced persons, returnees, and host communities in the central Sahel. As he launched the appeal in Geneva, Filippo Grandi, the High Commissioner for Refugees, highlighted the remarkable generosity of local communities, but noted they are at a breaking point, particularly in Burkina Faso, where the number of people internally displaced has more than quadrupled from less than 200,000 a year to almost 850,000 at the end of April. The appeal includes $97 million initial requirements for 2020, $29 million to implement the COVID-19 prevention and response measures, and in displacement areas, an additional $60 million to scale up UNHCR's emergency response as part of its Sahel strategy. Staying in Africa, this time in Zimbabwe, the UN team on the ground, led by the resident coordinator, Maria Ribeiro, is helping the government to address the triple threat posed by the virus, the severe drought, and the lingering impact of Cyclone Idai last year. The country has 332 confirmed cases of the virus and 4 deaths. To respond to the pandemic, the UN and our partners have appealed for $800 million to help 5.6 million vulnerable people, or 40% of the population, in areas of food, health, water, sanitation, education, protection, shelter, among others. Only about 20% of this appeal has been funded so far. For its part, the World Health Organization in Zimbabwe is supporting the government with COVID-19 surveillance and on addressing the declining rates of immunization. The UN Development Program has shifted more than $4 million from its HIV program to COVID-19 response and is supporting human rights monitoring and compliance by law enforcement. The UN Children's Fund and WHO are also supporting this time community-based health services, while UN Women and the UN Population Fund are working with NGOs to curb gender-based violence. The International Organization for Migration has helped with the repatriation of nearly 6,000 Zimbabwean migrants from neighboring countries, and that's more than 900 returnees in the past week alone. UNICEF, IOM, and WHO are also working in facilities housing quarantined children returning to Zimbabwe. And food insecurity being a big issue, WFP has helped nearly 1.5 million people with either cash or in-kind food distribution, and has transported personal protective equipment as well as virus testing kits and ventilators donated by the Jack Ma Foundation. And FAO, for its part, is also assessing the status of food security in the country. Moving to the Middle East, we have a humanitarian update on Syria, where the UN is working to address critical humanitarian needs of more than 11 million people in need of assistance across the whole of Syria. In January to March of this year, we, along with our partners, reached an average of 6.2 million people in need each month across Syria, meaning both government-controlled and non-government-controlled areas. This assistance is saving lives, but more has to be done. We're working to scale up the response across the country, including comprehensive efforts to help contain the spread of COVID-19, both from within Syria and, importantly, through important cross-border assistance, which provides an essential lifeline to millions of vulnerable people in the Northwest. In recent weeks, the worsening economy and extreme volatility of the informal exchange rate in Syria has begun to impact families already struggling to cope with the impact of 9 years of food crisis. WFP has sounded the alarm over the rapid increase of food insecurity in the country. 9.3 million people are food insecure, and that's an increase of 1.4 million in just 6 months. And in Yemen, our humanitarian colleagues there tell us that between April 10th, when the first case of the virus was confirmed in the country, and June 11th, authorities have announced 564 confirmed cases, including 130 deaths. OCHA notes that these numbers are not representative of the true severity of the outbreak, as Yemen's health system does not have adequate capacity to test all suspected cases. All indications point to the rapid spread of the virus across Yemen. The case fatality rate observed in case is alarmingly high at 24%. That's about 4 times higher than the number worldwide. Aid agencies in Yemen continue to do all they can to scale up the response to the pandemic, but the agencies do not have the funding required to deliver the scale needed, nor to continue existing programs much longer. As we've been saying, more than 30 of the 41 UN-supported programs in Yemen will close in the coming weeks if additional funds are not secured. Now more than ever, the country needs outside help. Already, incentive payments for health workers have had to be cut amidst this pandemic. And as you'll recall, on the 2nd of June, the high-level pledging conference for Yemen, we had 31 international donors announce pledges of a combined $1.35 billion to meet the humanitarian needs. This is only about half of what was raised last year, despite the situation being worse than ever. Much of that was pledged, and the event has not yet been dispersed. We urgently call again on donors to fulfill all pledges immediately and also to consider increasing support. And today is the World Day Against Child Labor, which this year focuses on the impact of the pandemic on the issue. According to a joint ILO and UNICEF brief released today, a million more children risk being pushed into child labor as a result of the pandemic. This could lead to the first rise in child labor after 20 years of progress. ILO and UNICEF warn that evidence is gradually mounting that child labor is rising as schools close during the pandemic. Temporary school closures are currently affecting more than 1 billion learners in over 130 countries. Even when classes restart, some of the parents may no longer be able to afford to send their children to school. And I wanted to say that on behalf of the Secretary General, I want to welcome the cross-regional statement by 132 signatories supporting his COVID-19 communications initiative and verified. Misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories not only complicate the global response to COVID-19, they cost lives. And finally, not one but 2 pieces of good news on this Friday. We've had 2 full payments to the regular budget. Many thanks to our friends in Nicaragua and St. Vincent's and the Grenadines. We are so close to hitting the century mark, as we have now 99 fully paid up member states. And following my briefing, we will turn to hear the words coming from Reem Abaza on behalf of the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. All right, that's a question. Maria, here you have a question.
Hey, thank you, Stéphane, and thank you for technicians to making it possible for me to get back. And I wish you a very happy time, free of computer time next week. So I just was quite surprised by the numbers of United Nations personnel were COVID positive in Mali. The numbers declared, which, as you mentioned in his speech yesterday. So I was going to ask you for an update on general numbers of students around the world ill with COVID, and also probably you have an update on rough timeline of us getting back to United Nations headquarters as New York has started its reopening.
So let me take it backwards. I don't have yet an update to share with you on the next phase of the building, but we do expect to have some announcement either later today or on Monday. What I can tell you is whatever is decided will be guided by being very careful, by science. We may be a bit lagging behind New York. We want to see how things go on the ground, but the safety of the staff, the diplomats, the visitors to the building, and of course the journalists that come into the building is paramount. So we will do things in a very careful, coordinated, and careful way. Obviously, also supporting whatever the member states themselves decide of meetings. So the cases for Mali, the last ones I have, of 187 cases, which include sadly two deaths from peacekeepers. 45 so far have recovered. The total for the UN system of yesterday is 953. What I do want to add is that, obviously the mission in Mali is very much aware of these cases, continues to take mitigation precautionary measures. Just recently, restrictions of movements in and out of the mission premises in the regional office has been established, and there's controlled by uniformed personnel of people going in and out. In some of the camps, there's strict confinement measures that apply to the contingents that are most impacted, while the rest of the troops remain operational. So we try to isolate those groups of peacekeepers that are affected and let the other ones do their work, because we also obviously have to do their work. The inter-regional passenger flights done by the mission have also been suspended, and it is now, of course, mandatory to wear a mask in every UN facility in Mali. Edie, please.
Thank you, Steph. First, to follow up on Libya. Has the United Nations gotten to review any kind of evidence on these mass graves? And has it been invited to do any forensic investigation?
On Libya, what I can tell you is that no, the government has announced that they will conduct an investigation. I understand they've also secured the site, and we will support them in any way we can. So you're breaking up.
I had another question, and I saw that I got muted. On Lebanon, does the Secretary General have any comment on the latest major protests regarding the basic plummeting of the value of the Lebanese currency? And before I get muted again, is there any update on when we all might get to talk to the Secretary General?
Okay. Let me just say, sorry, on Libya, I don't want to misspeak. So let me just because I had something else in my head. What I can tell you is that the mission in Libya welcomes the decision by the Justice Minister to establish a committee to look in these mass graves. And we, the mission, call on the members to promptly undertake the work aimed at securing the mass graves, identifying the victims, establishing a cause of death, and returning the bodies to next of kin. And as I've said, we will provide whatever support we can. On the Secretary General, we are looking at a press conference, which I hope to confirm soon, a few days prior to the anniversary, the 75th anniversary of the signing of UN Charter, which we all know is the 26th of June. On Lebanon, we've, I think what, for us, it's first of all important that everyone, all concerned, avoid violence and respect the right to peacefully protest and to protect that right. For us, national unity in Lebanon continues to be essential as these reforms are underway, and our special coordinator there continues to be in touch with the government, also working with the International Support Group for Lebanon. Okay, Abdelhamid, yes, sir.
Thank you, Stéphane. Follow up on Libya. I mean, there are two mechanisms to investigate developments in Libya, especially related to crimes against humanity or war crimes. The ICC, they have the authorization from Resolution 1970, and the panel of experts. Why the UN mission authorized the Justice Department of the current government, of the government national accord? There will be many parties would cast doubt that this investigation would be impartial. Why don't we use the international mechanism?
Can you just repeat the last part of the question? Who authorized what? I
mean, the statement came from OSCE. It endorses the government doing the investigation. That might be, they might not be satisfactory to many parties, and they would be accusing them of impartiality. Why, if we have two kinds of mechanisms, the ICC and why they don't do the investigation about these mass graves?
First of all, it's not up to us we're not there to authorize the government to do anything. It's a sovereign government. It is the primary responsibility of any government to initiate investigations into these types of crimes. We will be there to support them, but it is the internationally recognized government. It is their responsibility to do so. We have made it clear in our statement in what we think, in how we think this investigation should be done. The ICC is separate from us and is free to do whatever they wish to do. And the panel of experts reports to the Security Council, and I think they have provided some very interesting and very thorough reporting on the situation in Libya. Iftikhar, did you have a question or no? Okay.
Hello?
Yes, did you have a question?
Yes, just wondering.
Go ahead.
Steph, thank you. I was just wondering whether you have an update on the FAO-backed anti-locust operations in Pakistan and in India, as Pakistan now says the situation is complicating because the swarms are now coming from Afghanistan after the initial influx from Iran.
I don't have an update off the top of my head, but we will try to get you something as quickly as possible. Gloria, you have a question.
Is time the labor laws obscured? Because all over the world, as soon as a son is born, a sign goes up, Joe Blow and Son. And those kids start working from the day they're born in the family trade, which gives us top tradesmen. I think we have to qualify and look more into the difference between that and coal mines in the Philippines where kids are working at 5 years old. I think we need what ages and under what circumstances for the child laws.
Okay. Thank you. Toby, please.
Hi, Steph. Thanks very much. I have two questions today, and I'll take them one by one if that's okay with you. The first concerns the sanctions and the intention to levy sanctions against ICC officials from the U.S. Yesterday, and the UN's response was whatever is decided will take place under the auspices of the host agreement. And I was just asking for some clarification on that. What relevance does the host agreement have in this particular case? Can you give us a little bit more context?
What I said is that the U.S. authorities had publicly said that whatever would happen would be within the framework of the host country agreement. Without going too much into the legal issues, the host country agreement regulates the way UN officials are able to work and operate when they travel to New York, to the United States, to attend official meetings. Your second question.
Thank you. Second question. This is a bit of a complicated question, but it's helpful for our audience, I think. So bear with me for a second. But so an Ohio senator today was fired from his job as a medical professional because of his response to a question, basically because he said COVID cases could be higher among the African American population because they're not washing their hands enough. And this was regarded as a racist statement, and he was quickly terminated from his position. My question is, I'm appealing to the UN as a moral authority on matters of racism and human rights here to explain why that sort of attitude, and not just in his case in particular, but in general cases about systemic racism, why that kind of stereotyping and generalization is destructive in terms of the discourse of both providing good health information to the public while also maintaining positive attitudes towards disenfranchisement of people.
I mean, listen,
No,
I'm not
not.
going to go into the details of the case because I just saw a headline. What I can tell you, and I would refer you to what the Secretary General said on the need to fight the scourge of racism, which runs deep in many societies all over the world, and you know, it's not, I think anyone who reads a statement like that can understand the issue within the offensiveness of it. What is clear also at a time of a pandemic, I refer you to what I said just earlier about how misinformation and disinformation costs lives, prevents prevents the people from accessing the right treatment. The scourge of racism impacts everything from the labor market to healthcare to human rights to education. And I think it's plain for everyone to see. And our focus needs to turn and redouble to fighting that scourge. Did you have another question, Toby?
No, that was it. Thanks very much, Steph. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? All right. I was about to say goodbye, but I only say farewell and turn to Reem. And have a great weekend, and I'll see you in about a week. Take care.